Since 1972, the McIlvaney Financial Group has been a conservative, contrarian investment firm. With that mindset, they have created a multifaceted approach to portfolio management, offering a wide array of services including wealth management, a unique short fund, hedging through precious metals, and excellent educational resources. We have had David McIlvaney on our show multiple times because we respect his outlook, viewpoints, and recommendations. You really need to let them give you a much better understanding of what true portfolio diversification is. Just go to mcilvaney.com/Main Street, with Main Street all spelled out, to get introduced and to garner free information. Again, that's mcilvaney.com/Main Street to schedule your free 20-minute consulting session. Hi, everyone. This is Jason Barrico of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. He is Ron Paul's communications director. He's co-host of the popular Mythbuster show with Ron Paul every Friday on the Ron Paul Liberty Report channel, and he's author of Set Money Free: What Every American Needs to Know About the Federal Reserve. Chris Rossini, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Jason, for having me on. Appreciate it.
Now, Chris, I want to ask you about Austrian School Economics. Why is it better, in your opinion, than Keynesian Economics, Marxism, Monetarism, or MMT, modern monetary theory?
What attracted me to Austrian Economics is it's basically the Austrian part you can get rid of and put free market in front of it, because I've always been an advocate for liberty and freedom. So when I started reading Austrian economics, it was so basic and easy to understand as to how the real world works. And the other schools of economics, like Keynesianism and monetarism, they're basically there to justify government intervention. They sit and concoct theories trying to tell politicians, yeah, it's okay to do this, and they try to justify it with mathematical formulas, with statistics, and other hocus pocus. Austrian economics does not seek to do any of that. In fact, it's what I've learned most from the Austrians is how much trouble government intervention gets us into, and why they constantly create one crisis after another. The first time I actually discovered it was by accident, and it was probably the best accident of my life. I was trading stocks at the time, and this was during the NASDAQ years, and I came across an article by George Reisman, and it explained the Austrian business cycle theory. And once I read that, it just put everything into perspective. Now, I had a lot more to learn, of course, but it opened my eyes as to why the booms and busts that we always go through, why they happen. And it's really not that complicated unless you don't know, and then you are fed the government line that they're actually there to save us from the crisis that they create. So, you know, the Austrian school, while I read a lot more in my earlier years about Rothbard and Mises, I do have to pick those books up again and reread them. But they totally changed my life and in understanding how the world works.
I have a similar wake-up story to you. It wasn't the NASDAQ bubble. I was actually a stockbroker during the 2008 financial crisis. So that was a very interesting, exciting time in my life, trying to sell people stock mutual funds and bond mutual funds while everything was crashing. And, you know, the excuses I heard on TV were the stereotypical Keynesian nonsense from talking heads on the mainstream financial media, talking heads from Wall Street experts, and talking heads from academic Keynesian economists. There's a liquidity trap. This is all capitalism's fault. Blah, 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 blah. The government has to step in. And as I started, you know, finding Peter Schiff's work, finding Ron Paul's work, it started to make so much more sense to me compared to, oh, this is a liquidity trap. Well, what caused it in the first place? There had to be some type of misallocation of capital or a boom that led to this bust.
Yes, exactly. Same people with me, Peter Schiff. I actually started working with Peter Schiff. I used to help him put out his newsletter. But yeah, he would come on television. I'd be cheering him on, himself, Ron Paul. People that tell the truth, they're so powerful in this world that we live in of constant lies. It's amazing. And constant justification for more government power, more government intrusion. That's all we hear. They're the only options that are ever offered to us. The Austrian school and the Austrian business cycle theory explains that it is actually the government's interventions that constantly create these problems and the more interventions that they do, the bigger the problems that they create down the road.
Exactly. And, all these financial bank bailouts, they've just gotten larger and larger over the years. Before even the NASDAQ bubble, there was, I think, the Mexican bank bailout, the tequila crisis, that the Wall Street banks had overleveraged there. There was long-term capital management. There was the Asian tiger crisis. Wall Street banks were just overleveraging like crazy. What most people don't realize, Chris, is the history of the bailouts is that, these bailouts have started decades ago. Yes, they were a lot larger in 2008, but the United States government has been they bailed out the airlines decades ago. They bailed out the military-industrial complex and many of the defense contractors decades ago. So it seems like, anytime one of these major industries gets in trouble, they don't want them to fail, and the government just keeps stepping in, like you said. And it's scary that we've gotten to this point of central planning and intervention, and, we're the minority. Regardless of what the Pope is saying, how, libertarians are dangerous and it's a large rising movement, right? I feel like we're the minority here, people trying to apply reason and say, we shouldn't be bailing all these people out. It's creating really bad moral hazard in the marketplace.
Yes, I agree. I was disappointed, as many other libertarians were, at the Pope. And it doesn't seem that he even understands what libertarianism is. Libertarianism, at its root, is that no one, including the government, is allowed to use aggressive force against another individual. That's, in a nutshell, that's what libertarianism is. So no violent force or aggression unless it's in self-defense, but you can't be the aggressor. So to think that this is a big danger in the world is a misunderstanding of what libertarianism is. The government, on the other hand, is an institution of force and violence. They have a legal monopoly to use force. That is where the problems come from. And imagine the types of people, well, actually, we could see the types of people that are attracted to this institution, the sickest individuals that want to wield power and use violence to force people to do things that they wouldn't do on their own and wouldn't do voluntarily. So yes, the Pope is off. Hopefully he finds the true meaning of libertarianism someday, but I won't hold my breath. As for the bailouts, what we have is, at first, it starts with the Federal Reserve. They're the ones that have the power to print money, a power that no human beings or group of human beings should ever have. When you have institutions like banks and politically connected institutions that know that they're going to get a bailout, they can bet the house, and if they lose, the taxpayers will pick up the bill. If they win, they get rich. Either way, they're fine, and that's the moral part that gets totally twisted under the system that we have. You're supposed to, when you make mistakes, pay for your mistakes. They always have the taxpayer to pay for their mistakes, and it creates monsters out of people. And someday, hopefully that will change.
Well, Ron Paul was able to get the one-time partial audit of the Federal Reserve. That's good. I don't think, though, that I think that was just probably rhetoric, what Trump said during the election about wanting to audit the Fed more. It doesn't look like he's going to support the bills that Senator Rand Paul and Representative Thomas Massie are trying to get passed in Congress for more audits of the Federal Reserve, unfortunately.
I agree with you. Trump was very smart. He knew what to say to get elected. He's gone back on so many of it. It is still early. Maybe he'll turn things around. But as of right now, he has given the establishment basically everything they want, and they're still going after him, which, amazingly, what are they upset about? He's done things that they like. He's kept the wars going. The budget was a total disgrace. Obamacare is staying, and they're still hounding him. But as far as him turning things around, he's absolutely not done it up to this point.
Yeah, I think the swamp is actually winning. I mean, look how many Goldman Sachs people he's brought in. I didn't think he would bring in this many. I didn't vote for him, but I know a lot of people that have voted for him that are getting very upset with his actions lately. Although I think, he has done a few good things here and there. Like, I think he definitely should have fired Comey. Definitely should have fired him earlier. He did put in a pro-Constitution Supreme Court judge. So he has done a few good things, but all in all, I think, he hasn't done a lot of the things he's promised, like you said.
Yes, I agree with that. Hopefully it changes. Hopefully he can survive what's being thrown at him. They're constantly talking about impeachment now. The press is totally against him, and I'm not even a Trump fan, but I can see what's being attempted, and it's rotten. To think that he would be impeached and replaced with who knows, somebody even more that everybody in the establishment is happy with would be doubly worse for liberty, which is all that I'm concerned with.
Yeah, I think, Mike Pence would be like the replacement guy as of right now, and he's like basically a neocon that Trump used to get the votes in the Midwest. So he would be less of a maverick, less of a wild card then, and easier for the deep state to control than Trump is right now.
Yes, I agree, and we'll see how it plays out. Just a few steps towards liberty I'd be happy with for Mr. Trump to do. Maybe he'll do it. Who knows?
Well, we'll see who the replacement for Comey is, because what we need right now is we have so many people. I live right outside of Washington, D.C. There's so many people, Republicans or Democrats, who know what the laws are and they don't follow them, and they don't worry about going to prison for breaking the law. So we need someone there who will be the head of the FBI. And if you did break the law, I don't care if you're Hillary Clinton, I don't care if you're John Podesta, I don't care if you're a billionaire Republican congressman, you should go to prison for breaking the law.
This is true. Unfortunately, with the way that our government has evolved, or devolved would be a better word, it's, people are starting to be above the law, not being prosecuted for crimes. They do it basically whatever they want, and it's just brute force and trying to use mob mentality to get your way. And that's not a good thing for society, even though most people probably don't pay attention. The way things and the way the power changes hands and what power means these days, it's very dangerous. And like I believe it was Snowden that said they have a turnkey dictatorship that can be, all they have to do is turn the key. And if the mobs are for it, who knows what that could bring to us.
Yeah, Chris, and I think, the presidential office now, it's not just Trump. It's been for the last couple decades, the amount of executive orders and the power the presidential office had is not what was intended. It seems to me that Congress has deferred a lot of its power. They're too gridlocked, they're too corrupt, they're too worried about, padding their own pockets and getting rich before they leave office, or working on, connections or getting the lobbying jobs so they can get rich after they leave. I think the founders intended Congress to have most of this power, whether it's declaring war, a lot of the expenditures, and it seems, the president has taken over a lot of this power. So going forward, I wouldn't call Trump a dictator quite yet, although the mainstream media is calling him one. But, whoever takes over after Trump could be even worse than Trump in this regard with the executive orders and, more control and more power and loss of our liberty.
Oh, absolutely. I personally think that the president has way too much power, but it's been granted to him over the years, and especially with war. That has, our founding fathers specifically made Congress in charge of war so that a leader doesn't just willy-nilly go into war whenever he wants, and that's exactly what we have today. And the reason Congress does that is they could wipe responsibility off of themselves, because these wars are a total failure and disgrace. So they don't want to be voted out as voting for the wars, so let the president take care of it. And so they shirk their responsibility for political reasons instead of standing up for what's right. But the empire is so big right now that they probably feel that they're even powerless to stand up against it.
Yeah, there's very few congressmen who are willing to stand up against it. Ron Paul and Rand Paul are two of the only ones, and look how they get treated by the other congressmen and by the mainstream media. It's not fair at all how they get treated, but they're very strong and mentally strong and brave men, and they're willing to put up with the garbage that they have to do what they think is right. They're more principled men compared to a lot of the other people in Congress.
Absolutely, and I am biased here since I work for Dr. Paul, but he is tough as nails, and he will stand for what's right against anything. And he proved that in Congress over 30 years. And really, it was his example that is the most powerful thing that came out of those 30 years. Because what a shining example he set for not even people who go into politics, but people outside of politics. I mean, we're constantly, as libertarians, bombarded by the other side. It's a never-ending stream of, whether from the left or the right, of people that are constantly want government to do this or government to do that. And here's a person that was surrounded by hundreds of them, and he stood up to every single one often being the only no vote if it was unconstitutional. So that's, we could all learn from his example and realize that even though it's tough for us too, if we stick with what's right, good things, it's a good thing for the world.
Yeah, libertarians by the mainstream media and a lot of people who but a lot of people aren't familiar with what a libertarian really is. I think we're mislabeled as far right, but I think we're more centrist or moderate in our views because we're socially liberal and economically conservative. So labeling us, just far right wingnuts or whatever, which is normally what a lot of people who don't know what a libertarian is or what the media says is really unfair. I want to transition now and ask you about your book. I've listened to interviews where you've talked about your book. You've said it's a book of Austrian School Economics for beginners. How would you compare your book to another book about the Federal Reserve written by G. Edward Griffin called The Creature from Jekyll Island?
Yeah, my book is basically, I don't know if for beginners is the right way to say it, but it's basically a question and answer book for people that don't know anything about the Federal Reserve. I believe that the Federal Reserve is the beating heart of big government. They finance welfare on the left and on the right for crony corporations, and they finance warfare, which both the left and right support. Without the Federal Reserve creating money to finance this, government would run into financial straits. They wouldn't be able to do what they do. But because they have this central bank, this printing press, that they could always rely on to finance them, they could basically do whatever they want. It's the ultimate power to create your own money. So my book is to try to explain this on a basic level. It's called Set Money Free, what every American should know about the Federal Reserve. And because the Federal Reserve is supposed to be something that you're not supposed to care about. It's Federal Reserve. How boring does that sound? But it plays such a huge role, even though it's ignored by the media and everyone. They always get a pass. They're always able to hide in the shadows. I try to just explain things on a basic level on what real money is, how money came into being as a function of the marketplace. It was not just dictated by a government that this is money and how it is. Government ended up hijacking money. And I explain what the Fed does, how it helps government, and the moral hazard that we talked about earlier, and all the people that are close to power. So it's basically just one question after another. What does this mean? What does that mean? And I just try to just put it into a way that the average person who maybe just has a few minutes a night to even pay attention to what's going on in government can look into it, and maybe it'll spark their curiosity.
Sounds like a worthwhile book to give to friends or family members, rather than asking all their questions if they're willing to take a few minutes to learn. But unfortunately, Chris, I know a lot of really smart Americans out there. People are doctors and lawyers, even people who went to business school who don't really know anything about the Federal Reserve. Just trying to explain to them that the Federal Reserve can create money out of thin air. They can do secret bailouts, what Ron Paul found out with these currency swap deals, which are basically interest-free loans that they don't even have to pay back in the trillions of dollars, and arbitrarily Congress doesn't even have to approve them, and they can counterfeit at will. And then with the Federal Reserve as a backstop, the banks can then do fractional reserve lending, which is even just as bad, if not worse, than what the Federal Reserve does, because Rothbard wrote about the free banking era in the past, and people were aware that their banks had no money in the bank. The bank would have to advertise about their fractional reserve, and people wouldn't go to the bank then if they knew the bank was doing it. But now, since the Fed's backing it, it seems like we're all corralled into this system.
Yes, the Federal Reserve is a marriage of banking and state. Just as we knew and we know from the United States that you shouldn't have a marriage of church and state. Well, banking and state may be even worse, because now you're giving ultimate power. I mean, just imagine being able to create your own money. That's a power out of nothing, just going to a keyboard and typing in numbers, zeros. And so they have that power. Nobody should have that kind of power. And what it does is it destroys all of our, when we see prices going up, it's not because of greedy businessmen or whatever other excuse that they concoct that you'll see on television. the value of our money is going down because they create trillions and trillions of dollars. I mean, if you have a baseball card, a Mickey Mantle card, and you found out there's a secret stash of a trillion more, you'd know immediately why the value of your card just dropped. The bottom just fell out of it. So that's what's happening with our money. I wouldn't say nobody, many people are learning about the Fed, and it's constantly growing, but still a vast majority of people have no idea as to why are my bills constantly going up? Why is there inflation? They just use the word inflation as if it just drops from heaven. Inflation is caused because they create the money, and that's what devalues what's in our wallets, and that's why prices go up. But the Fed, they've been very, very good up until Ron Paul of keeping the Fed just totally out of anybody's minds. You won't find about it in government schools. The media will not talk about it. But Ron Paul took the flashlight and shined it on these rodents. And slowly, more and more people are coming to understand it. And the future is bright, long term. Short term, we still have our issues, of course.
You brought up a very good point there about how everything's gone digital now. They don't even have to get the linen. They don't even have to run the printing press 24/7, 365 physically like Weimar Germany did, in the Weimar Republic did in the past, or Venezuela or these others. They can just do everything digital now at the stroke of a keyboard. So it's really mind-boggling how much more money or credit they can put into the system. You know, I think you're talking about inflation. A lot of that inflation hasn't really hit Main Street yet. So yes, prices have gone up on rent, utilities, food, but more of that currency was given, you know, with the Cantillon effect, to Wall Street and to banks and to large corporations who can buy back their shares or do like leverage buyout deals instead. And that's why the asset prices like real estate, bonds, stocks, that's why all these things are art. That's why all these things are sky high. And, you know, people who are saying, oh, where's the inflation, you crazy libertarians? The government CPI numbers say the inflation's only 1% or 2% right now.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree. Prices, I'm not saying that we're like Venezuela. We're kind of like boiling frogs. I mean, I see it in my bills, but that doesn't mean that we've hit the point where prices are spiraling yet. If we continue down this road, that's what's down the road for us. And hopefully it could be averted somehow. But yeah, the money definitely has been flowing into auto loans, into student loans. The debts are piling up beyond what we could even imagine now. But consumer prices, while rising, still have, the worst is still ahead for us, unfortunately. These people that are saying where are the price rises, well, you just wait, because the money has been created. And once the banks start parting with it, because there's a lot of, without getting too technical, money stored at the Fed that hasn't been lent out yet. Once that hits, it's big trouble.
Yeah, lending and spending, the velocity of money. But the other thing is, I brought up the CPI. I think that's a lie. I think the government's underreporting inflation. I think inflation's a lot higher. If you use John Williams of Shadow Stats, it's much higher. If you use Ed Butowski of the Chapwood Inflation Index, he says inflation is over 10%, 10 to 13% in most major cities per year for the last 5 or 6 years. So, and that's based on, consumer staple stuff. So I think that's stagflation. So I think we're going to have a lot worse stagflation because the people in power, they won't allow free market forces. They won't allow markets to clear. They don't like I don't know why. They just don't like deflation for whatever reasons. They just don't want real free market forces and markets to clear.
Yes, and that's the case that we try to make every day, is that's exactly what we need. We need accurate prices. We need accurate interest rates. Instead, we have artificial prices and artificial rates, which creates all the bubbles and the distortions. And, you're talking about the housing market before. All those shopping centers and I remember in Florida that were built that should have never been built. That was all fueled by Federal Reserve credit. All these students that are just buried in debt. It's all credit. None of this should have ever happened. But it enslaves people. So the people that are pulling the strings, they like it, but it buries all of us in debt, in higher bills, and it's not the right way to live. We need accurate prices, reality we need, not a kaleidoscope that the Federal Reserve creates by artificially putting down interest rates. We need real interest rates to tell us when to invest, when not to invest. And, we'll get there someday. It's just how much pain are we going to have to experience before that happens?
Agreed. Have you been to the Washington, D.C. metro area lately? There's like nonstop real estate construction cranes around the Washington, D.C. metro area, building luxury houses, luxury condo buildings. It's just been this way really since 2009 or so, nonstop construction cranes. And each year it seems to have increased more and more.
It's been a few years since I've been down there, but I could imagine what it's like when I was down there. I could tell everybody in the area is living it up. It's like a little bubble, and that's why everybody flocks to it. That's why there's lobbyists everywhere. That's why they want a piece of the government pie, and so that area is living at the expense of everywhere else. And they're not going to know it. They're not going to complain about it, and they're not going to stop it. Economic law will stop it, but when it happens, it's going to be painful. And our work is for enough people, obviously not everybody, but enough people to understand where the source of the problem is. It's not the greedy businessman. They love every time there's a financial crisis to parade some CEO in handcuffs that something's being done. That's small potatoes compared to what the Federal Reserve does. And the finger needs to be pointed there when the next crisis occurs, and who knows, it may just happen.
Agreed. Now, I want to ask you about Ron Paul. What important life lessons have you learned working for Ron Paul?
There's a few things that I wasn't expecting before I started working for him. Is he's got a tremendous sense of humor. He's lighthearted. He really enjoys what he's doing. And he works extremely hard. He's 82, and nothing. Whenever I call him with something or tell him about something, he already knows about it. So how he does that, I don't know, but he keeps his mind and his body active. I know he exercises a lot, miles and miles a day, both biking and on treadmill and jogging at 82. So he's not only a good example for obviously advocating liberty, but just in keeping your mind and your body active. He's a pro at it, and he's as sharp as ever. He definitely sets an example, at least to me, since I get to work with him, on what your later years can be like if you stay active.
Yeah, Ron Paul's one of my heroes, definitely a great role model, and he's one of the bravest people I've ever seen, willing to take, all the insults and ridiculous stuff that the mainstream media and his political opponents have made up about him, the stuff that they've said about him on TV. And, he doesn't join in the name calling. He just continues. He's a man of principle, and he takes the higher ground and sticks with his integrity and the message of liberty, and trying to stick to the facts of what's really happening in the economy and with the corruption in government.
Yeah, I mean, our job is not easy because there's pushback constantly. I mean, you could go onto any of our articles or Facebook and you'll see there's constant pushback on whether you're against Obamacare. They want Obamacare. They want global warming. They have to stop. It's a never-ending stream of opposition, but our job is to just put the truth out there, and it'll reach the people are paying attention. It'll reach the right people. So he's definitely set an example on how to do that.
That opposition of the comments, Chris, it's probably paid opposition by George Soros and David Brock of Media Matters. I know that you're on their list of targeted people that they pay people all day to post and comment about to go after you. People like you.
It wouldn't surprise me because there's so many of them, or at least it appears that way. I don't know what people do, but they definitely try to squash, because the truth, it harms them. So while it may be great for the average person to live freer lives, the people that wield the force, they don't want that. They want the truth suppressed as much as possible. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's I've definitely heard that there's paid trolls. Whether or not they're on Ron Paul's page, if it was ever proven, it wouldn't surprise me the least bit.
George Soros has very deep pockets. But I want to ask you now about Mythbusters. You know, you have so many. How long have you been doing Mythbusters for? Over a year now?
Yes, I believe it's around 75 shows that just Mythbusters.
Yeah, they're fantastic. They're really good episodes to show, you know, if you have friends or family members who aren't libertarian, but you know, you want to show them kind of what you think the truth is on certain issues, then I think, you know, that's a good way to get them interested in learning more about the topic. I don't think you're going to run out of any topics, though, for government corruption.
No, we never run out of topics. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, they're just a great way, though. You know, I'm an expert in my field investing in the economy now, but I still find them very entertaining. I try to send them to my friends whenever my friends have questions about, you know, certain issues. Now, I think they're one of the best ways to get people interested in the libertarian and freedom movement.
Thank you, Jason. And while I'm only on Fridays, I definitely also want to recommend the Ron Paul Liberty Report every other day as well. It's 5 days a week on YouTube. It's broadcast live at noon Eastern. You don't have to watch live, obviously, but they've done over 500 shows now, and whatever's happening that day or the day before, you get Ron Paul's take on it, and it's always very good. So thank you.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic, and unfortunately, you know, we were discussing this before the show. You know, Ron Paul Liberty Report is also a victim of the YouTube censorship algorithms. I think, you know, basically all your videos have been demonetized, which is very unfortunate. Because then, you know, you guys could have a lot bigger channel now. You guys could have a whole television network if YouTube hadn't stolen your advertising revenue.
Yeah, it's tough. It's just another obstacle. It's a shame because ultimately Google, Facebook, Twitter, they're going to end up hurting their own business. Maybe they have no choice. Maybe the government turns the screws so hard on them that they have no choice but to start censoring and stuff. I don't know what that's. I'm sure it's not easy. But they're doing it nevertheless, and it's going to end up hurting them in the end. But, you know, part of life is adapting, and when the tyrants put one obstacle, you have to find a way around it and get a workaround. And, you know, a lot of people, we were talking before the show about Patreon and other workarounds. It offers an opportunity for others that aren't going to censor.
Yep, and you know, there's nothing fair about what's going on right now, whether it's the fascist big technology companies, you know, trying to go after libertarians, or people who were pro Donald Trump or anti Hillary Clinton, or anyone who's pro gold and silver, or the government changing the rules that only helps out banks or other corporations. So it's exactly like you said. It's not fair and it's unfortunate, but people are going to have to adapt to survive in a environment where big business and governments are basically teamed up together to change the rules and create inflation and taxes to try and screw over small and medium-sized businesses and people in the middle class.
Yeah, I mean, that's the name of the game of government. Instead of protecting our liberties, which is what it should be doing exclusively, it's basically an instrument of force that the highest bidder can use to their advantage, and that's exactly what's done. And once you yield to force can be used aggressively against your opponents, that opens the door for everyone to just rush in and, hey, let's use this. Let's squash our competition with it. Let's create licensing fees that are so high that good luck trying to get into our line of business, or subsidies or bailouts, or the list goes on and on forever. This is not what government should be. Government should be there to protect us from aggressors, not be the aggressor itself.
Amen. And the other problem, Chris, besides the government selling things off to the highest bidder and, you know, protecting against competition, is that the people working inside the government don't have, you know, the people's best interest at heart. A lot of times, you know, they've become this protected bureaucracy class of from Atlas Shrugged, Wesley Mouch, where, you know, they exercise and wear Che t-shirts, driving around BMWs and Mercedes Benzes, wearing having Apple iPhones and Apple iPods and all these expensive things, but yet hate capitalism. So, you know, this is created because big government is so big now, with all these different agencies, unelected bureaucrats. You know, these guys, a lot of them are making twice the salary of a lot of entry-level private sector jobs. and they can't get fired.
No, it's a bizarro world, but that's exactly what what we're dealing with, and they're so arrogant too. I mean, whether you're the TSA or if you ever go to a Social Security office, anytime you have to deal with government, it's almost as bad as dealing with Comcast or one of the cable monopolies. It's horrible. But they have this force that they rely on, and they don't have. It's not the market that's paying. This is basically stolen money that pays their paycheck. So it's not willing customers. I mean, when you're dealing with willing customers, you have to satisfy those customers. They don't worry about that. There's no satisfaction. If you don't like what they're doing, tough luck. Go vote. Like that ever changes anything. So yeah, it's a whole mentality. And again, we got to get back to the Fed. They make all this possible. As long as you can finance your tyranny, and that's exactly what they do, it's going to go on until who knows.
Excellent point. Yeah, in order for a welfare warfare state and big government, government only has three methods of financing, really. They can either tax it, they can either borrow it, or they can print it. So, they can't borrow too much because they can totally destroy the currency too quickly. They can't tax people, they can't double taxes overnight. There'd be pitchforks and people on the street. It's just easier to do it with the inflation tax, and hardly anyone even notices. They can fake the inflation statistics. They can get Keynesian economics trained PhDs to come up with, new formulas to remove the inflation, all these different things.
Yeah, it's the ultimate. That's why they work so hard to establish a Federal Reserve. And the Fed isn't the first time. I mean, it's a central bank, but it's not the first central bank. There were others prior to it. So they kept trying because it's the ultimate power to have this monopoly, to create money, and to buy the government's debt. The government doesn't have to go peddle its debt to others if it doesn't want to. The Fed will create money, buy the debt, and there you go. Government has its money to go, try and that's why politicians, they make all these promises. They don't have to worry about going down the street. Where are you going to get this money from and going and physically taking it from somebody? They have their financier that's ready to do it, and you don't have to worry about the dirty work of actually grabbing the money from somebody to give it to somebody else.
Excellent point. And your latest Mythbusters episode talks about this with the infrastructure boondoggle. So if Trump or whoever else wants to spend over $1 trillion on new infrastructure, I mean, I doubt they're going to raise everyone's taxes that much directly to their face. Maybe there will be some tax increases. Trump has talked about a VAT tax or border adjustment tax. And if the Democrats win back both houses of Congress, there could be new taxes levied as well. But they don't really have to do that if they don't want to, because they could just get the Fed to, create them more money. They could just monetize the debt. And right now, the dollar appears to be the strongest fiat currency compared to all the other ones, which is kind of perverse. If you had told me, Chris, I'm not sure about how you feel about this, but if you had told me about 7 or 8 years ago, right after the 2008 financial crisis, that the Federal Reserve would expand its balance sheet to over $4 trillion, they would create this much more money in credit, and the dollar would still be this strong relative to other currencies, I would have been pretty shocked.
I agree with you, but things have to go the way that they go. The longer that this goes on, I'm sure by this point, the higher ups in the Fed and in the government, they think they're invincible. They think that the earth and all of its people will bend to its will. But ultimately, they're going to hit the wall. When that ultimate is, we don't know, but we do know this. We have history to teach us. And there has been plenty of empires, many, many, many. You can go, there's a lot of YouTubes that show you maps on how the empires come and go. And that's the one lesson. They all go. None of them are still here. It's just the United States for now. And that unfortunately, instead of remaining the land of the free, it went for the empire. And it got it. And it'll end someday. When, we don't know. But, pride cometh before the fall. And our government is filled with people that believe that they're masters of the universe.
Yeah, and to add to your point there, almost all those other empires, they all ended up on fiat money. So, yes, they had other moral problems. They had huge warfare states and their empires overexpanded, but they almost all went to fiat currency. And, then it was only a matter of time until, their population was totally impoverished and massive inflation increased, so they almost all went to fiat money, and it was one of the last stages of the end of the empire. Well, Chris, I really enjoyed our discussion today. I'd like to have you back on in the near future, since I do enjoy Mythbusters so much, and I'd like to promote that show on my channel here. If our listeners want to follow your work more on the Ron Paul Liberty Report and also buy your book, how did they do so?
The Ron Paul Liberty Report is at ronpaullibertyreport.com. That's the website of which I'm the editor of. And all the shows are up there. But if you go to YouTube, you can watch them there. Subscribe to the Ron Paul Liberty Report channel. You'll enjoy every show. If you like Ron Paul, you'll love having him as a part of your life every day. My book, Set Money Free, is in Amazon, and you can buy it there. Dr. Paul wrote the foreword to the book, so he likes it as well, and hopefully that helps you. It helps you to understand the Fed. That's the beating heart, as I like to call it. And if we could get that taken care of, the big government problem will go away.
Wall Street for Main Street needs your help. YouTube stole $7,200 from Wall Street for Main Street in annualized YouTube AdWords revenues, and they kneecapped our analytics down by more than 80% across the board since September 2016 with their new censorship algorithms to stop the rapid growth of our channel. That was money we could have used to upgrade our website, pay bills, and invest in improving our content and growing our business. Our audience of loyal listeners is all over the globe and so large now that if most or all of our listeners were to commit to donating $1 to $5 each month to our Patreon account, we could easily meet our goal on Patreon. Wall Street for Main Street also accepts one-time donations on our main wallstreetformainstreet.com website. That's WALLSTFORMAINST.com website via PayPal, Gold Money, or Bitcoin. We also accept donations of physical precious metals that can be mailed to us. Thanks to all listeners who have already made a donation, and thanks in advance to any listeners who make a future donation or contribution to the growth, improvement, and success of Wall Street for Main Street.